There are exactly 3 seconds between receiving the assignment and understanding that your life, as you know it, is about to end. Agent Marcus Chen got his 3 seconds on a Monday morning, October 14th, at 6:47 a.m., in a windowless briefing room that smelled of stale coffee and government-issue disinfectant. The target's photograph stared back at him from the manila folder. Viktor Sokolov. Arms dealer. Suspected of moving enough weapons through Eastern European channels to destabilize 3 countries. 42 years old. Married. And that's when Marcus saw her photograph, clipped beneath Viktor's, almost like an afterthought. Elena Sokolov. 29. Dark eyes that seemed to look through the camera lens and into some distant horizon. The intelligence officer's voice droned on about infiltration timelines and operational parameters, but Marcus was already committing her face to memory, the way he'd been trained. He didn't know yet that this woman would become the fracture line in everything he believed about himself. Before we go further into this story of impossible choices and devastating consequences, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me, could you ever betray everything you stand for someone you love? Your answer might surprise you by the end of this. The mission parameters were clear, even elegant in their simplicity. Marcus would assume the identity of a luxury car broker, a cover that gave him access to the circles where men like Viktor operated. 6 months of deep preparation. New passport, fabricated business history, a modest apartment in Prague's Vinohrady district that had been staged to look lived in for years. His first encounter with Viktor was scheduled for a private auction on October 28. The rules were absolute. No emotional attachment. No deviation from protocol. Report everything. Trust no one. Marcus had followed these rules for 8 years across 4 continents. He'd never even been tempted to break them. The auction took place in a converted warehouse south of the Vltava River, all exposed brick and strategic lighting that made the vintage automobiles look like sculptures. Marcus arrived at 7:13 p.m., wearing a suit that cost more than his actual monthly salary. Viktor appeared 20 minutes later, and Marcus watched him work the room with the casual confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences. But Viktor didn't come alone. Elena Sokolov entered the space like a disturbance in still water, something about her presence that made the conversations around her pause for just a fraction of a second. She wore a black dress that was somehow both elegant and understated, and when Viktor placed his hand on the small of her back, Marcus saw something in her eyes. Not fear, exactly. Something colder. Resignation, maybe. Or calculation. Marcus made contact with Viktor near a 1967 Shelby Cobra, struck up a conversation about engine specifications and restoration authenticity. Viktor was charming, charismatic even, with the kind of smile that made you forget he trafficked in human suffering. And through it all, Elena stood 3 steps back, silent, her gaze drifting across the room like she was somewhere else entirely. The second encounter happened Thursday, November 2nd, at 2:34 p.m., and it changed everything. Marcus had been tailing Viktor to a meeting at a cafe in Old Town Square, standard surveillance protocol, when he saw her sitting alone at an outdoor table despite the autumn chill. Elena. Without Viktor. She was reading a book, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup for warmth, and something about the scene felt intensely private, like he was witnessing something he shouldn't. Marcus knew he should keep moving, maintain his distance, but operational doctrine required understanding the target's household dynamics. That's what he told himself as he approached her table. Mind if I sit? Everywhere else seems crowded. The lie came easily. Half the tables were empty. She looked up, and for a moment he thought she might refuse. Then she gestured to the chair across from her with a small, ironic smile that suggested she knew exactly what he was doing and found it mildly amusing. They talked for 47 minutes. Later, Marcus would remember every word, the way her accent softened certain consonants, how she tucked her hair behind her left ear when she was thinking. She was reading Dostoevsky in the original Russian, and when he admitted he'd only read it in translation, she said, "Translation is just beautiful lying. You get the words but lose the soul." She asked what he did, and he delivered his cover story flawlessly, but the whole time he felt like she was reading something deeper, something true that he didn't mean to show. When she finally stood to leave, she said, "Victor mentioned you. The car dealer. He thinks you might be useful." The word useful hung in the air between them like a challenge. Then she walked away, and Marcus sat there trying to remember when he'd last felt this unsettled by a conversation. The surveillance intensified through November. Marcus tracked Victor to meetings in underground parking garages and industrial zones on the city's edge, documented his contacts, photographed license plates and faces. Every Friday at exactly 11 p.m., Victor met with a man named Dmitry Volkov in a private room at a restaurant near Wenceslas Square. Weapon specifications were exchanged. Money, lots of it, changed hands through a network of shell companies Marcus's team was still mapping. The case was building perfectly. Marcus was doing exactly what he'd been trained to do. But 3 times a week, sometimes 4, he found himself at that cafe in Old Town Square at 2:30 p.m., and Elena was always there. It became an unspoken routine. They never planned it, never exchanged numbers, but somehow they both kept showing up. She told him about growing up in St. Petersburg, about her mother who taught piano and her father who disappeared when she was 12. Disappeared, she said, is such a clean word for what happened. It suggests magic, like he simply ceased to exist. The truth is always messier. She never talked about Victor directly, but Marcus learned to read the pauses, the way her voice would flatten when their conversation drifted too close to her present life. She'd married Victor 4 years ago, Marcus knew from the file. The intelligence suggested it wasn't a love match, but the file didn't capture the profound loneliness that seemed to radiate from her like cold. December came early and brutal that year, snow falling on the 3rd and not stopping for days. Marcus met his handler, Agent Sarah Brooks, in a parking structure in Carlin on Tuesday, December 5th, at 9:17 p.m. Sarah was all business, 15 years in the field and not interested in complications. She handed him updated surveillance equipment and a warning. Victor's getting paranoid. His network knows someone's been asking questions. You need to close this, Marcus. Get the final evidence we need for the weapons transfer and extract. Then she studied his face in the dim light. You're too close to this. I can see it. Marcus denied it, of course. He was a professional. He knew the rules. Sarah didn't look convinced. That same night, at 11:43 p.m., Elena called him. He didn't know how she got his number. I need to see you, she said, and there was something in her voice that made him throw on his coat without asking questions. She was waiting outside his apartment building, snow collecting in her hair. Inside, she stood in his living room and looked around at his carefully constructed life, the staged photographs, the books he'd never read chosen by a CIA profiler to match his cover identity. You're not really a car dealer, are you? She asked quietly. Marcus felt his training kick in, the immediate denial, the defensive posture. But then she said, I don't care what you really are. I just need to know if I can trust you. And before he could answer, she told him everything. Victor was planning something. Something bigger than his usual deals. Elena didn't have all the details, but she knew it involved a shipment coming through Hamburg in 3 weeks, enough firepower to supply a small army. She knew because she'd been translating documents for him, Russian to English, thinking they were just business contracts until she realized what she was really handling. I thought I could live with it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I could just exist in this life and not be responsible for what he does. But I translated a shipping manifest last week, and I can't stop thinking about where those weapons will go. Who they'll kill. She looked at Marcus then, really looked at him, and he felt something in his chest crack open. I need help. I need someone to stop him. And I think maybe that's why you're really here. Marcus should have reported this immediately. Should have called his handler, activated the emergency protocol. Instead, he made coffee, and they sat on his couch until 4 a.m., and he told her a version of the truth that was close enough to feel dangerous. She was an intelligence asset now, whether she understood it or not. But somewhere in those hours, she also became something else entirely. The operation accelerated. Elena fed Marcus information about Victor's schedule, his meeting locations, his security protocols. She was methodical, careful, everything a handler could want in an asset. But Marcus knew what Sarah would say if she found out how he'd acquired this source. Knew it violated every protocol about emotional compromise. He was supposed to be manipulating Elena, not falling for her. Yet every piece of intelligence she provided brought them closer to taking Victor down, and wasn't that the point? Wasn't the mission what mattered? These were the lies Marcus told himself at night when sleep wouldn't come. On December 18th, at 6:52 p.m., everything began to unravel. Marcus was running surveillance on one of Victor's warehouses in the industrial district when he spotted Dmitry Volkov arriving with 3 men Marcus didn't recognize. Heavy security. Something big was happening. Marcus moved closer, using the cover of shipping containers, and that's when he saw Victor emerge from the warehouse with a 4th man. Tall, military-bearing, speaking Russian with a Chechen accent that Marcus's trained ear caught even at a distance. They were discussing the Hamburg shipment, confirming dates, January 4th, and Marcus was so focused on capturing their conversation with his directional microphone that he didn't notice the security details spreading out behind him until it was almost too late. He ran 3 blocks through narrow streets slick with ice, losing his pursuers in the maze of industrial buildings. But they'd seen his face. Victor's security had seen his face. Which meant the cover was compromised, and Marcus had maybe 48 hours before Victor connected the luxury car dealer to the man fleeing his warehouse. Marcus called Sarah from a safe house, hands shaking. "We need to move now," he said. "If Victor runs, we lose everything." Sarah's response was immediate. "Then we extract you tonight." "Mission's over, Marcus. We'll rebuild with another operative." But Marcus thought about the Hamburg shipment, about the weapons that would disappear into conflicts that would kill thousands, and he thought about Elena, what would happen to her when Victor figured out she'd been helping his enemies. "Give me 72 hours, Marcus said. "I can still close this." He went to Elena. She was waiting at the cafe even though it was past closing time, the owner a friend who looked the other way. Her face when she saw him told Marcus she already knew something had gone wrong. "He knows," she said simply. "He came home tonight different. Asking questions about my day, who I've been seeing. He's never cared before." Marcus took her hands across the table, felt how cold they were. "We need to get you out. Tonight. I have people who can protect you." But Elena shook her head. "If I run, he'll know for certain. And he'll disappear, and this will all be for nothing. I can buy you time. I know how to handle him." The next 48 hours were a masterclass in sustained terror. Elena stayed with Victor, playing the dutiful wife while Marcus and his team worked frantically to gather the final evidence they needed. Elena sent Marcus photos of documents using a secure phone he'd given her, taking insane risks while Victor's paranoia grew. Marcus barely slept, living on coffee and adrenaline, watching his phone for her messages and dying a little each time more than an hour passed without hearing from her. Sarah confronted him on December 20th, "You're in love with her. Don't lie to me, Marcus. I've seen this before, and it always ends the same way. She's an asset. That's all she can ever be." Marcus wanted to argue, but the words died in his throat because Sarah was right, and they both knew it. December 21st, 10:34 p.m. Everything converged. Victor had scheduled a meeting at his primary warehouse, the one where the Hamburg shipment was being staged. Elena sent Marcus the location, the time, the security layout. It was perfect. Too perfect. Marcus knew it could be a trap, knew Victor might be using Elena to draw him out, but the operation had its own momentum now, and there was no stopping it. Marcus's team moved into position at 11 p.m., federal agents coordinating with Czech police for the raid. Marcus was supposed to stay back, let the tactical team handle the arrest. He lasted exactly 4 minutes before he broke protocol and went in. The warehouse was chaos. Crates being loaded onto trucks, men with automatic weapons, and there in the center of it all, Victor, directing operations with calm efficiency. The tactical team breached at 11:47 p.m., flashbangs and shouted commands and sudden violence that Marcus had witnessed a dozen times before. Victor tried to run, made it almost to his car before agents tackled him to the frozen ground. It should have been over. Clean arrest, career-making case, everything Marcus had worked for. Then he saw Elena. She was standing near the warehouse office, and Victor's head of security, a man named Alexei, had a gun pointed at her head. The tactical team had missed him in the initial breach, and now he was using Elena as leverage, shouting in Russian that everyone needed to back away or she died. Marcus felt time slow down, that strange clarity that comes in moments of absolute crisis. He had his weapon drawn, had a clear shot at Alexei, but the angle was wrong, too much risk of hitting Elena. The tactical team leader was trying to negotiate, but Marcus could see Alexei's finger tightening on the trigger, could see the calculation in his eyes. Alexei was going to kill her. He was going to kill her because she'd betrayed Victor, and there was nothing Marcus could do about it within the rules of engagement. So Marcus broke every rule he'd ever followed. He stepped forward, hands raised, and offered himself as a trade. Let her go. Take me instead. I'm the one Victor wants. Alexei laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You're the American. The spy. Victor told me you'd come. And then Elena did something Marcus would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. She looked directly at him, and he saw no fear in her eyes, only a deep, terrible calm. She said, I'm sorry, Marcus. For all of it. And then she moved. She threw herself backward into Alexei, using her body weight to disrupt his aim just enough. The shot went wide. Marcus fired. Alexei went down. Elena fell with him, and Marcus was running before he knew he'd started moving, catching her before she hit the concrete. She wasn't hit. The shot had missed. But she was shaking, and when she looked up at him, he saw tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. Is it over? She whispered. Marcus nodded, unable to speak. Around them, agents were securing the scene, reading Victor his rights, documenting the weapons that would never reach their intended destinations. The mission was complete. Textbook operation. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt like he'd lost something essential. The aftermath unfolded across 3 continents and 2 months of debriefing. Viktor Sokolov was facing 70 years in federal prison. The Hamburg shipment was intercepted. 2 other arms dealers in his network rolled over on their associates. It was, by any objective measure, a massive success. Marcus was recommended for a commendation. Elena entered witness protection, a new name and a new life somewhere Marcus wasn't allowed to know. The last time he saw her was December 23rd, in a safe house outside Prague. They had 6 hours before her transport left, and they spent it the way people do when they know they're saying goodbye forever. She told him she'd known what he was from their second conversation at the cafe, that she'd approached him deliberately because she'd been looking for a way out for years and he'd seemed like an answer to a prayer she'd stopped believing anyone heard. I wasn't supposed to fall in love with you, she said. That wasn't part of the plan. That just happened. Marcus told her about the moment in the warehouse, how for 3 seconds he'd been willing to throw away his career, his mission, everything, just to keep her safe. I never broke before, he said. 8 years, and I never even came close. You destroyed me in 6 weeks. Elena smiled then, sad and knowing. Good, she said. Maybe that means you're finally human. When they took her away, Marcus stood in the snow and watched the car disappear into Prague's winter darkness. Sarah found him an hour later, still standing there. You did good work, she said. The best I've seen. You saved thousands of lives. Marcus nodded, but he felt hollow. The mission was complete. The target was neutralized. The weapons would never kill anyone. By every metric that mattered to the agency, he'd succeeded perfectly. But lying in his apartment that night, staring at the ceiling, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd made a terrible miscalculation. He'd chosen duty. He'd let Elena walk away into a life where he could never find her, could never know if she was safe or happy or even alive. He'd followed the rules, and the rules had given him everything except what he actually wanted. His handler had been right. This kind of compromise, this emotional entanglement, it always ended the same way. With someone standing alone in the snow, watching their heart disappear into darkness, and wondering if they'd made the right choice. 3 months later, March 8th, Marcus received a postcard. No return address, just a photograph of a beach he didn't recognize and 3 words in handwriting he would have known anywhere. Still beautifully lying. It was Elena's voice in those words, her philosophy about translation and truth and the spaces between them. He kept the postcard in his desk drawer, proof that somewhere she existed. Somewhere, she was reading Dostoevsky and drinking coffee and maybe, sometimes, thinking about a man who'd loved her enough to let her go. The agency offered Marcus another assignment in June. Deep cover in Berlin, 18 months minimum, target unknown. He accepted without hesitation. Because the only thing worse than the pain of losing Elena was the thought of feeling nothing at all. And as he sat in another windowless briefing room, looking at another target's photograph, Marcus understood something fundamental about the work they did. Every mission required sacrifice. Every operation demanded something personal. The question wasn't whether you'd lose pieces of yourself in the field. The question was whether those pieces would grow back, or whether one day you'd look in the mirror and realize there was nothing left. Marcus thought about Victor in his cell, about the weapons that would never fire, about the lives saved by numbers too large to comprehend. He thought about Elena on her beach, reading in the language of her childhood, free from the weight of complicity. And he thought about himself, still standing in the snow in his memory, still choosing duty over love, still wondering if there was a version of this story where he got to keep both. But deep down, he knew the truth. There are exactly 3 seconds between receiving an impossible choice and understanding that your life will never be the same. Marcus had made his choice in that warehouse, when he'd fired the shot that saved Elena and ended any chance they had at a future together. He'd chosen to be the agent instead of the man. And now he had to live with that choice, carry it through however many missions remained, however many years stretched ahead. The mission was complete. The target was neutralized. And Marcus Chen was alone. That's the cost they never mention in the briefings. The price of doing the right thing isn't always something you pay once. Sometimes it's something you pay forever, in quiet moments when you wonder what could have been. Sometimes duty doesn't feel like honor. Sometimes it just feels like loss. So here's my question for you, the one that matters more than any like or subscription, though I hope you'll hit both. If you were Marcus, standing in that moment between love and duty, between keeping her and saving thousands, what would you choose? And more importantly, could you live with your choice? Drop your answer in the comments. Tell me if you think he made the right decision. Tell me what story you want to hear next. Because this world is full of impossible choices, and someone has to bear witness to what they cost. The mission is always complete. The question is whether we survive it.